Greg Piasetzki is a lawyer and a historian, a Métis, and joins me now, after I say this, subscribe and donate, to talk about you're saying it's a fallacy that white men killed all these native kids in the residential schools. And the biggest example, I've heard it around the world because of our prime minister saying Kamloops. And you're saying there's no evidence of that. Right. Now somebody would say, yeah, but we heard that 260 kids are buried in unmarked graves. It's just a story?
It's just a story. I mean, it's premised on a radar study, but anyone who knows anything about radar for ground penetrating radar knows it can't identify graves.
Most people don't know, so tell me about ground radar.
It's a useful tool for identifying things like a foundation in the ground. It'll give a solid bounce from that. Nothing else. It won't identify coffins or graves or bodies. It just gives you a bounce. It could be anything, and I've used it. I've been on archaeological digs where we've used it, and what you get is a bounce, and you dig, and you see if there's anything there. Half the time it's a tree root.
Why did anybody dig in Kamloops if they got a bounce?
That's the question. It would be the easiest thing in the world. In Kamloops, they're actually in the middle of an old orchard that had a drainage system installed about 1915. Guess what? When you install a drainage system, you put in piping, you dig ditches. A ditch will show a bounce, a pipe will show a bounce. There's going to be lots of bounces if you're in an orchard. Tree roots show a bounce. So there'll be lots of radar returns from an orchard.
You've studied the treaties, you've studied the history of what happened, and the residential schools, as you said, across Canada. Most of them in quite isolated places.
Right.
Why were they in isolated places?
They were servicing people in even more isolated places. They built them somewhere so that they could service kids from northern Saskatchewan, Northwest Territories. So they draw from a fairly large area to have kids. Kamloops was unusual, but it was built very early. Kamloops was one of the early residential schools, and it was on a rail line, so that was its key. They could bring kids in from remote reserves by rail to go to Kamloops.
Okay, so you're a lawyer, you understand motives, and you study the history, and you have some sympathy. You're a Métis. You're not just some sort of British guy who's sitting here saying, we want to hurt people. What do you think has happened? Why do we have so many terrible stories about what Canada has done?
Well, I hate to say it, but there's a political angle to it, of course.
And what's that?
Indians are living in poor social conditions across the country. They're improving. 50% of them have moved to cities, so that's an improvement. They're at least where there's a possibility of a job.
Right.
But the other 50% are in remote areas where there's no jobs, and they live, it's a welfare system, federally regulated welfare system where...
And actually, no water in many places, and bad education.
They're all health. Yep, they're not good places, and they're places where other people would just move to the city. That's what you do. You move to the city.
In 10 seconds, why are these myths coming up?
Well, politically, it kills the issue.
And it gives another issue.
Gives them an excuse to provide money that kills the issue on the Aboriginal side, and
there we have it. Greg, thanks very much. 3 minutes. This show provides independent analysis of the issues. We are not paid by the government. And as I am finding, so much business in Canada relies upon various governments that they don't want to sponsor or advertise on a show which may become controversial, which talks about liberty, freedoms, sometimes criticizes government. I've had guests on that support the government. But people are saying, you know what? We don't want to bite the hand that feeds us, i.e. government, which is why I hope you'll subscribe and contribute to keep this show on the air.